meeting of the Attleboro School Committee is called to order. The first order of business is an executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation. And as the chair, I am declaring that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of this public body. So a motion to move into executive session.
Second.
Roll call vote. Mrs. Zito.
Yes.
Mr. Tyler.
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mrs. Scales is not here. Mrs. Sawyer, sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
And this committee is now in executive session. The administration, please stay. And if there is anyone else here. pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting is being electronically recorded. We have two items on our agenda tonight. The first is a discussion, one that this committee has been compelled to revisit frequently over the course of the term. That is transportation services. I will turn the floor over to the administration momentarily to help set some context, but essentially on April 22nd, the city auditor notified the school committee and the municipal council of an expected transportation shortfall. This is not the first transportation shortfall that's been identified over the course of the fiscal year. There are legitimate questions that are being asked of this committee and of the administration, and it's our hope tonight to ascertain some clarity and some answers. And so with that, I'll ask the superintendent to walk us through, and any members of your staff, obviously, walk us through what led to the current shortfall and just some of the conditions surrounding it.
First and foremost, Mr. Chair, that on behalf of some of my administrative colleagues and myself, I do want to apologize to all of the school committee members that, in fact, they were to hear from an outside person of the school district about a transportation deficit. That's not where you should be hearing that from, either the business manager or myself. You should have had this information from us more so than from somewhere else, and that I apologize for. At the same time, you need to know that based on the projections in February, and we've been meeting in a transportation subcommittee with the mayor and the mayor's office and the city auditor monthly since November. And based on the projections just in February, that the increase of the $170,000 for transportation budget was anticipated at that time to take us through the course of the school year. There is now a budget deficit in transportation as of in the last week or so of $59,186,000 in addition to that number. This deficit, in fact, is attributable to projected increases with out-of-district special education cost, transportation for those students. The reality is, in that one line item, the additional cost that was unanticipated is in excess of $61,000. Without those additional costs, we would have been in the black about $2,000, and that's cutting it really close. But in that one line item, and there are 9 specific line items that in fact contribute to the total amount of the transportation budget. So at this time, I would like for, I will provide you with a printout and have Mr. Rose, in fact, share with you what that in fact contains.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Mr. Sheehan's handing out a spreadsheet which was updated to reflect the latest and greatest information. There's one primary message that I want to convey. The primary message is this: the $170,000 request for increase did not take into consideration at the time any huge spike in special ed out-of-district students. That had been flat. In fact, the last 3 months, January 20 students, February 19 students, March 21 students, and so that $170,000 request for increase back in late January, early February, that was primarily geared toward homeless transportation. So the reason why we're here tonight talking about transportation isn't because of homeless transportation, it's because of special ed out-of-district transportation. Briefly, let me just try to explain how that process works. We find out that we have a student that has to go out of district. The special ed office hooks up with the transportation office. We try to arrange for the very best pricing that we can, going through the bi-town collaborative. In certain cases, the fee could be as high as $204. If there aren't any other students that are on that van going to that special ed school outside of Attleboro, could be $196 per day. So we have, for example, we have 2 students going to separate locations where combined the cost is $400 per day, which what's $2,000 per week, $8,000 per month, and so the cost can kind of get the cost can rise, to say the least. But the primary message I want to convey before we go to the spreadsheet is special ed out of district is the reason why we're here tonight talking about transportation and talking about a projected deficit. Let me go through the
I'm sorry,
report.
Mr. Rose,
Yes.
I have to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
I mean, that is the underlying issue. There are a variety of other issues that have precipitated this meeting, one of which is, as Mr. Sheehan referenced earlier, the lack of communication about the problem, and the other is the assurances that were made before the problem, and perhaps I'm sure they were made in good faith, and perhaps it was impossible to predict. But if it's a usually you know if something's impossible to predict. So we're going to get back to this point over and over again, I think, and I want to, if we can nip it in the bud early, I think it's important that there were assurances made at the time of the last deficit when it was identified that we wouldn't run into this problem again.
Correct.
That is a major problem that those assurances were made and not fulfilled.
Correct.
Okay, so why don't you just continue?
And I'll also say that in the month of January, we had 20 students, February, we had 19 students, March, we had 21 students, and April, we had 24 students. In February, I can't anticipate that we're going to have 24 students going out of district where it's going to cost us $8,000 every single month for 2 students.
Okay, but if you can't, then in February you have to communicate that.
Right.
That's my point.
Okay.
Thank you.
You welcome. Okay, let's go to the spreadsheet. Analysis of the FY15 transportation budget. Based on the projections in February, the increase of $170,000 of the transportation budget covered anticipated costs at that time. There's now a projected budget deficit in the transportation budget of $59,186. Deficit's attributed to a projected increase of $61,009 in the out-of-district line for special education. So listed on the left-hand side, and this report is very similar to the report that gets handed out at the Finance Committee meetings. This has been reduced a little bit, frankly, to try to make it perhaps, I hope the message will be a little bit clearer. The primary message I want to convey is if you look at the bottom, we started out with $3,083,000. The difference between the $3,083,347 and $3,253,347, that's $170,000. That's the increase that was requested back in late January, early February. February projection shows the $32,35,668. The difference at that time was $17,700 on the positive side. Current budget $32,53,934. This is what we're currently showing in Munis. The projection is $3,313,102, and so the difference between the numbers comes to $59,168. So the bottom line is the request for $170,000 back in late January, if it had not been $170,000, if it had been approximately $230,000, that deficit would not be showing up. And at that particular point in time, I was gearing based on a spend rate for special ed out of district of a particular figure, and that particular figure ramped up over the last month.
Mr. Withers?
Mr. Rose, this is a specific, kind of getting into the nitty-gritty here.
Sure.
But you had said that the 170 back in January or February did not take into account additional out-of-districts special education transportation, and it was almost entirely McKinney-Vento. But I'm looking at the original budget for out-of-town contract was 170. And when we revised it in January or February, it was 254, 484.
Correct.
That's an $80,000 difference for out-of-town contract. So
Correct.
it looks like we had already seen there was a growing increase in that area.
No.
Then why was there an $84,000 addition to that line item on the budget?
Because the city auditor said, when you send forward your purchase order at the beginning of the year,
Mhm.
Tom, you need to adhere to the contract. and the contract calls for 29 buses. So don't send over a purchase order that only calls for 27 buses, which is what we did. And so because of that, that line item had to get bumped up to 1.8 million. Once that happened, now I'm in a shuffling game of trying to find out where in the world am I gonna come up with those other dollars within the existing transportation area. And one of the areas that got tapped into was special ed out of district. So we started out the year with a contract for 29 buses, with a PO for 29 buses, with actually 27 buses on the road.
So out-of-district transportation was initially under budgeted, that line item?
To come to the answer is yes, to reach a $1.8 million purchase order for 29 buses, absolutely. But the bottom line is this, when the budget was developed by me, the budget wasn't developed based on 29 buses. The budget was developed based on 27 buses, but when the purchase order had to go in at 29, that's when, frankly, the shuffling of dollars within the various accounts had to occur.
But isn't the question then, why wasn't the original budget planning for 29?
Absolutely, it's a very good question, and the answer is, I consulted with the folks in the transportation office, and they told me, I think you can get through with 26 buses.
Right, but legally, weren't we required to have encumbered for 29?
Legally, we were required to encumber for 29, but we're only going to use, the plan was only to use 27, and Bloom Transportation was well aware of that. We met with Bloom Transportation twice each month during the summertime, and we told them, plan on 27 buses, and that's what you're gonna gear toward. As it is, they've only used, they added on a 28th bus first week in December,
Yeah.
29th bus hasn't
I'm-
been,
I'm
nor is it
saying-
ever gonna be added.
Isn't the city auditor's point that because the contract calls for 29, that we're legally required to encumber funds for all 29?
The answer is yes.
So am I correct in saying that, I mean, the budget should plan for that? I'm not, I mean, I
I understand what you're saying. Go ahead, I interrupted you.
no, I think my question's reasonable, but you know more about it than me, so if it's not, I want you to tell me.
No, your question is reasonable, but there's only one wrinkle. The wrinkle is this. I did not build a budget for 29 buses when I've been told, and I believe, that we can operate on fewer than 29 buses.
I understand that part. Mr. Larson?
Just kind of going on what Tom was talking about. I mean, last year when we put the transportation budget together, I mean, I remember being on the finance subcommittee, and we at that time didn't know or didn't anticipate that we were going to have to encumber all 29 buses when we put the budget together. So we had other money in other line items that we were planning on in the budget. In September, purchase order went on the system. The auditor informed us that we had to encumber the entire contract that the city had. The entire contract has 29 buses. So at that point, the conversation went to, okay, we need to move money in other line items up to the Bloom contract line so that we have enough money in the Bloom contract line to satisfy the auditor's office. At that point, we had conversations with Bloom about coming up with an addendum to their contract to reduce the number of buses so that we could then take that money out of the Bloom contract line item and put it back in other parts of the budget. And I think that's what Mr. Rose is referring to, the shuffling.
Yeah, no,
So, I mean,
I think I get the sequence, but the addendum, I think, was later. Wasn't the
The
addendum?
addendum was later, once we realized, and once we knew for sure how many buses we were
Right.
going to need, because what we wanted to do is free up the money in the Bloom
Yep.
contract line item so that we could apply it to other parts of the budget that we knew we were running over on.
Okay. Mr. Withers?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Rose, you said that you had prepared the budget for 27 buses, that's what you were told and what you thought that you would need. But then, I believe you then said we do have a 28th bus, and
Sure do, as of
so-
December.
I mean, I think that just kind of ties in with the overarching reason of why we're here, is that it was under budgeted. I mean, if we needed 28 buses, that should have been foreseen, and if there was a chance we were gonna need 28 buses, we should have budgeted for 28 buses. I mean,
Except
I
that
te-
we're legally required to budget for 29.
That's-
I mean,
right,
we keep
that's
saying
what
that
I
we're
was-
trying to satisfy the city auditor. I'm pretty sure the city auditor is trying to satisfy the law.
Right.
So, I think we get a little bit of a don't kill the messenger.
No,
situation.
and I don't mean to imply that, I don't mean to imply that. I'm just-
And I was going to just say, I agree with Mr. Chairman, that we should have budgeted for 29. I mean, if that's what the contract says, we should have budgeted for 29, but at the very least, if we're using 28, there should have been some, I would think, foresight that there, you know, that, well, hopefully we won't have to, but there's a chance we're gonna need 28, so we sure as heck better budget for 28.
Well, I mean, isn't that the utilization of the 28th bus a few months into the year just sort of speak to the rationale behind the law saying you have to encumber all the funds that's under the contract? I mean, the law is trying to prevent you from not having encumbered funds for a bus that ultimately gets used. So the question that I think we're just trying to get to is that regardless of what advice came from staff with regard to actual use, if the law says 29, then we should have encumbered for 29. But that's not really the point that we're driving at right now. And to Mr. Larson's point, you know, there was a finance subcommittee and there was a school committee overseeing it, and you know, it took the city auditor apparently to advise us to get to the where we needed to be. But I think the point is that if the law, we've got to follow the law, and we've got to follow the law year round, not just until the city auditor notices that perhaps we're not. I mean, I think the school committee that is responsible for overseeing the school system, and we have a responsibility to make sure we do, and the administration for executing it. I think we're all in agreement on that point, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay, Mr. Rose, why don't you continue?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Tyler, then Ms. Singer, then Mr. Rose.
Again, sick of walking this answer every year, but when you look at the numbers, they reflective year after year. I mean, I would like to ask what the FY13 budget was for these, but I know it's pretty well the same. So Tom, I don't want you to go through that. The problem is this: when we're budgeting $35,000 on a mandated service in the Minto, and yet we're budgeting $75,000 on summer transportation. So summer transportation for 2 months of the year, we're budgeting $75,000. Yet when it comes to a mandate that we know that we're going to have to oblige fully, we fund $35,000 a year. It seems to me that we're trying to fit things neatly in a box, and we've been trying to do so for quite some time. And I want to know why we're trying to fit things so neatly in this box, this transportation box. Because these numbers will never match. There's no way that $35,000 will serve this purpose. We know that right off the bat. We've already budgeted twice as much for 2 months in summer transportation. We need to know as a committee, why are we trying to fit things into this box? Year after year, and then we have to go to bat every time and say why there's a deficit. That would be my question, Tom. I know it's a difficult question.
Sure.
But I think it's legitimate, and it's reoccurring, and that bothers me even more.
The $35,000 from McKinney-Vento was not the original budget. But that's what's showing up. That McKinney-Vento line item is one of the line items that got hit as far as a transfer was concerned to put 1.8 million into the balloon line. And what I want to quickly say, there was a very, very good working relationship and a very good procedure that was set up between the city hall and the school department in regard to de-obligating the funds from that $1.8 million line. Every month we got an invoice, sent it over to the city hall, funds would get de-obligated. So there was a process in place whereby the money was coming back in to the transportation line. But the answer to your question though, Mr. Tyler, is the reason why that's $35,000 is because there were budgeted funds in there earlier that I moved into the 1.8 million so that we could put through a purchase order for the 1.8 million. 35,000 is, we spent last year $114,000 on the McKinney-Vento. I certainly didn't budget $35,000 for that this fiscal year at the beginning of the year.
I respect your answer in one regard, Tom, but I don't think it answered my question.
Okay?
We know transportation costs are rising each year, yet we're still trying to fit it into a certain number. And it's not doable anymore. It hasn't been doable for the last couple of years. So why are we not increasing that transportation number? So we're not looking like we're mismanaging school funds. We're not spending transportation dollars on, like I've said before, on pencils, paper, or on other necessity. It's spent on transportation, mandated, most of it transportation that we have to do. Why are we not increasing the transportation number? Why? And we always seem to be on the other side of the stick about we're going back asking for more money. Why are we not asking for more money at the beginning of the fiscal budget year?
Well,
And transportation.
can I just add, maybe just clarify, are we asking for more money now?
Yes.
Okay.
Now meaning when?
Hopefully FY '15.
For FY 15, okay, right.
2013, 16.
Yeah.
And to address Mr. Tyler's and to address the concerns that Mr. Tyler has articulated, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
and everyone else.
Yes.
Right.
Including the municipal government, who has,
They certainly recognize this in our conversations, yes.
okay. I'm sorry,
I just
Mr.
had a clarifying question from my own. When you say that the 170 that we originally went back and requested more funds was primarily geared toward the homeless transportation piece, correct? And that then there was a spike in out-of-district special education. Are you defining that spike as 2 students? Am I reading this correctly?
No. The
Because
answer,
it's 2 homeless and 2, as far as the letter from the city auditor was that it reflected 2 homeless transportation and 2 out-of-district special education.
that was in regard to one particular purchase order. I was just using the 2 students as an example to
So-
state that out-of-district costs
So what's,
unplanned can spike.
so then what is that, what's the spike, how many students is that then, a spike in out-of-district special ed?
It would be going from 2019 and 21 up to 24. So the answer to your question would be a spike of 3 students. And 2 of those students are listed in that memo.
So, okay.
So it's 3, not
So
2.
it's 3, not 2.
Well,
The spike is 3.
Well, yeah, no, excuse me, yeah, obviously 24 from 21 is 3.
Right.
But Julian, I thought you had mentioned that I thought you'd made reference to a memo.
Well, because I saw the 3, and so.
The example that I gave involved 2 students, one at 204, one at 196, but the
Either way,
spike-
it's 1 student, it's 3 students, is the spike.
The answer is yes.
Mr. Sturz.
I believe it's correct to say that could equate to $600 a day? Is that right?
It can equate to $400 a day.
Per student?
For
It
2.
does.
Oh, no, the 400 is for 2 students,
Correct.
and then if it's a third student, we're up to almost $600, correct?
It's, the
Per
answer is
day,
yes. It's
and that's how we develop the issue.
correct.
Except that, I mean, I do feel the need, and again, anyone push back if I'm misreading something, but as we are identifying this issue and the cause of it, which the committee has a right to know, and more importantly, the community has a right to know, I don't want to get too fixated on the fact that there are 3 students and they're expensive to transport. That's our responsibility, and that responsibility will be fulfilled, regardless of what challenges come up, and as we know, they come up frequently. The problem is that we weren't prepared to fulfill our responsibility. And perhaps that it was an impossibility that we could be because of the various variables and the fluctuations. But at a minimum, this school department, and I'm including the administration and the school committee, did not effectively communicate the prospect of those fluctuations to the community and to the municipal government. And what was said between the administrations at those regular monthly meetings, the committee is not on a regular basis present for, and you can speak to that if you'd like, but I was with you in the city council presentation, and I've been here for each meeting. And if members of the municipal government or members of the community were taken by surprise that a new deficit was identified, they are within their rights to be surprised. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I agree with the statement that you should be surprised, you should be surprised. And the bottom line is that we certainly didn't estimate the appropriate amount of money going forward in the months of March, April, May, and June. Whether it be the homeless population or out-of-district placement special ed kids, not enough money was anticipated because we would have been asking for $230,000 from the city council at the time instead of 170.
Unless that gets us to even, in which case we arguably should be affirmed. Mr. Withers, then Ms. Singer.
Is the additional approximately $59,000 that the auditors referenced that we need and that we're going to be asking the municipal government for, is that just to cover 24 students out of district and the same amount of students McKinney-Vento funding, or is that take into account, maybe next month next month is May, so we'll still have transportation, maybe next month we'll have 28, and maybe McKinney-Vento will go up?
And the answer is it's the former. It's based on the current staff that we have right now, the current students that we have, where we know they're going, the vendor that's transporting them, the price that we have agreed to the vendor, both McKinney-Vento and out of district. So it does not, that $60,000, it does not include a potential spike of going from 24 to 20.
Then I think, we have to do one of two things, probably a mix of both. We either tell the municipal government we need considerably more than 60,000 to make sure we're funding our transportation for the rest of the year, and/or we tell them, this is what we need. If everything stays the same, we know from past experience it's not gonna stay the same. If you give us $59,168, there's a very good chance we'll be back a month from now telling you we need more. And I think it's probably a hybrid of the two.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say is when we're saying asking the municipal government, I mean, where my understanding is that the remedy, and this is, and I know there are committee members who are frustrated by this. I am frustrated by it. Everyone is within their rights to be frustrated by it, but given the circumstances that have led to this, the remedy that's being proposed, as I understand it, is not to seek an appropriation from the municipal government, but it's to seek authorization to spend the school funding to fix this. Am I correct on that, or is there another remedy being advocated?
I have looked at both of those scenarios, and I have gotten messages from the municipal side with regard to it as well.
Mhm.
Bottom line for me is that I personally think that this is a town responsibility, and because transportation is. Now, if we have to look at it in a different way, and I'm going to take the lead from the 9 school committee members as to how we're going to realize this deficit of $59,000, then we're going to have to look at every single line item that we have, and where are we in those line items to pay for this? It would still require, my understanding, permission to do that from the city council.
Yes, the municipal.
Use our money to pay.
The municipal
Something that they may be
council,
responsible
by
for.
state law, is vested with the authority
Right.
to grant the school department permission to use net school spending funds on ineligible expenses, transportation being chief among them. And as I understood the discussion that took place some months ago with the municipal government, was that because the shortfall came at such a late stage, this is as I understand it, but this was communicated from the administration to the administration. Because it came at such a late stage, and because we on the school side did not give essentially adequate notice that this was a possibility and eventually a reality, that it was not feasible for it to, that our request would essentially be denied. I mean, that's how it played out, correct? And I want to be very clear, while I share my colleagues' frustration about the use of net school spending on anything outside of the eligible expenses, I think we can all understand the danger of the precedent of a failure to anticipate costs, which at a minimum, that's what it's being perceived as, being used as an effective argument to seek supplemental appropriations. But I thought there was a question over here. Ms. Singer, then Mr. Storrs.
Just to go back again to what you had said prior, I do not want it to seem like I was focusing on 3 students. That was not my intent in that question. My intent was, and with conversations we've had before, I just want to clarify, that when we asked for the 170, that was if nothing else changed for the rest of the year. Correct?
With special ed out of district, correct.
With that 170 was, if everything stayed as it was, we would be fine to get through the rest of the year.
With special ed out of district, yes, but not with all the other accounts. The 170 included a good bump for homeless transportation, which is what we needed.
And my point in asking about the number was that a spike, and this is just, a spike shouldn't be 2 or 3 students. I mean, we should have planned, as I believe Mike, referred to before. It's unrealistic to keep that the same. It never stays the same. And so, my point was to just, bring out the fact that 2 students shouldn't be a spike. It doesn't matter how many students, but 2, it seems like it shouldn't be a spike in the sense of when you're figuring out a budget. Like, that should have
It should be
been
an
kind of a.
expectation.
Right. It's clearly, it fluctuates within 2 to 3 to 4 a month, depending on the month. And so why haven't we planned for that for the rest of, just, again, going back to right now, we're gonna go back to $60,000, but that's just to get a status quo through the rest of the year. So if in May, 3 more students come in, we've hit a spike again, and now we have to go back again. The forecasting of it and the asking for what a realistic, estimate would be, I think is
Well,
what
I
we're
think, I mean,
saying.
I
Does
think that leads to an important point, though. There was a meeting today between the administrations, correct? Were Ms. Singer's points incorporated into that
Yes.
conversation? And what is, I mean, are we on the same page? Are we getting
Yeah,
close
I
to on
think,
the same?
I think we're on the same page, I really do. The point is that we won't know what the exact number is until the kids leave school.
Right.
In the last day of school.
And I don't think we're asking for exact numbers, but I think it's very clear that it does fluctuate within a certain amount.
correct.
And so we're not asking for exact numbers,
Well,
because
that's
that's
what-
unrealistic as
what-
well, but some increase is expected.
What I was sharing with the municipal, don't think that this is the only deficit of 59,168. This can increase. We do have 7 or 8 weeks of school left.
And that's been
And that-
communicated.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mrs. Storrs.
You know, in looking at both the homeless and special education, I would assume we do trending from year to year.
Correct.
So this year, are we at a point where we're higher than we were the previous year?
Absolutely.
And,
In the answer, I interrupted you, please
well,
finish
I
your
was going to say,
question.
and the year before, and the year before. I mean, is it a continuous upward trend?
In regard to special ed out of district, this year, particularly over the last couple of months, for the most part, it had been between $20,000 to $25,000 per month. Heck, as you know, in the email or the memo from Deb Gould, one vendor alone, YCN, is now over $25,000, and that excludes all the other vendors. So the answer to your question, Mr. Storrs, is from a special ed out of district, it had been around 25 until most recently. From a homeless transportation side, that started changing in the fall. We tried to cover as best we could, but in the fall, last year, we finished off with approximately 22 students. We started off in September with over 70. Last year, we spent $114,000 in homeless transportation. This year, we're probably gonna spend somewhere in the area of around 250
Just that you said 22 to 70?
to 70
So we're talking almost a 50 student increase.
between June and September.
So what's to say we're not going to be at 120 next year? So I guess the question.
Good point.
That would be a spike.
The amount of rooms in the inn.
Hold on a sec. Wait. Okay. Is the answer to that nothing, or are there measures that we have in place to try to avoid these from going up?
We don't have control of that, do we?
Well, I know that we don't, ultimately, we don't have control, but are there proactive measures that we can or are taking?
Well, the proactive measures, quite honestly, is about handling the transportation.
Okay.
And we're doing the very best job. We've altered and changed a lot of those pieces through Joan. And the bottom line is that we have a better handle on where that transportation is, what those PRs are gonna be, what the exact amount of money is going to be, where those kids are going to be going, and doing the cost share in that manner. So we have a greater handle on that. To answer Mr. Storr's question, though, how do we control or know what those numbers are going to be? And I wasn't saying that facetiously, is because of how many rooms are in the inn. So if there's no other rooms available for homeless people in Attleboro, then we've reached max.
But is it, I mean, wouldn't we still pick up half the cost of Attleboro students who are
Yes,
displaced elsewhere?
Absolutely.
So that, I mean,
That's because we can't
I
control
mean,
the other places.
well, it's the
Right.
number of rooms in the inns everywhere. I mean, not just the, Ms. Singer,
No, I think we had asked when this first came up back in February for that trending. I think we had asked for that over the last 3 to 5 years. What does it look like?
Correct.
And I didn't get, did you
I don't
get
believe
that?
we were-
We never got that, yeah. I Am I correct in saying that we asked for that? I'm pretty certain we asked for that.
It certainly came up in discussion. I don't know if I made a formal request, but I'll make one now. Could you please provide the trending data to the group?
Could I just share one piece? It may help answer Mr. Stowe's question. For McKinney-Vento, the homeless transportation, the actual amount in February was $13,980.62. In March, it jumped up to $17,220. It is now projected to be over $18,000 for the remainder of the school year. So we've gone from 13 and continue to increase.
Okay. Mr. Sturzo, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, that's where it's a follow. So what I was trying to get at is, it seems like there's two different ways we could try to budget this each year. One is to do what's been done in the past, which is to try to estimate on the low side, on the safe side, or doing what it sounds like the committee's saying, which is estimate on the high side, or on the, I don't want to say high side, because from what I'm hearing, high is actually what's happening, so I don't know if there's a better term than saying on the high side, but estimating more realistically, if you will. So that way, we don't find ourselves in this position every year, as Mr. Tyler said. I mean, is that really what the committee is saying, that we want the?
I think the superintendent said that is, and I think we've seen the preliminary numbers, that is incorporated into those numbers, those types of projections. But I think that it sounds to me that regardless of what the projections are, what the ultimate request is, we have to, as a school system, and again, I'm including the school committee and the administration, we need to do a better job of communicating the degree to which some of this is unpredictable, because it's only to a certain degree is it the deficit that people are frustrated by. It is the communication about the deficit, and it's about the assurances that were made that this would not happen again. That's the crux of our issue. I have not heard anyone take a position against transporting a single student yet.
And quite honestly, Mr. Murphy, I thought that meeting every 3 or 4 months with the municipal side would increase that type of communication, that the right hand would know what the
But-
left hand is doing and know what those fact and figures were.
Isn't the issue here, though, that I mean, we've got the McKinney-Vento thing, which everyone seems to acknowledge is fluctuates wildly, that the shortages identified by the auditor last week are not McKinney-Vento shortages. And that it's, that the municipal government is identifying these because of line items that were left
The
underfunded. Now,
purpose-
at the end of it all kind of comes back to where the money was being
purpose
shifted
of that
to.
committee
Yep.
that meets every 3 or 4 weeks was not just McKinney-Vento. It was the entire
Right, the whole,
transportation
right,
budget.
yep. Mr. Withers was next, then Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a lot of what I was gonna say, I think you just said. I think, when we get down to it, one of the main issues here, and is we are under budgeted here, which we've talked about, which, maybe we can understand that to a certain extent because it's so unpredictable. And when we ask for $170,000, we ask for too little. It's unpredictable. Okay, I don't think anyone's saying that it's not unpredictable and that it's something that we should have foreseen what the exact number is. A major part of the problem is, like Mr. Murphy said, is that in this room several times, and before the municipal council, it was assured that it was going to be enough, and that's the frustrating part. Is that we've been told many times that $170,000 will get us through the end of the year, and there's still 2 months left. So it's not it's not just about budgeting. That's just problem 1 of 2.
Yeah, I think the communicating is largely the larger problem. I'm sorry, Mr. Tyler. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I couldn't agree more, Steve. Like I said before, over communication, there's never too much of it. But I think we tend to lose facts sometimes. When we talk about adding 50 students into we're a public school system. We have to accept everybody, no matter what their needs are. That's our job. In transportation, yeah, I hate transportation to the gills. But we forget about, not only do we have to provide these children with transportation, we've also now created a budget sometime in the previous May, but not encumbering those students into there, where now Marissa has to take her budget that's already set and provide them an education. And so I feel terrible when we have to submit a bill to the city over and above and beyond what we said. Yes, we can do better, projecting that, forecasting above and beyond, but people are forgetting that on our school side, we still have to educate them, and that comes with a significant cost also. So as much as I feel bad for that, you're not seeing the total picture if you think it's just transportation to that student. If you have 50 students, well, Marissa's budget is affected drastically by that too. And she does a great job with it. But, I mean, we can't just look at it as in one aspect of where we're having a municipal council or the city being a little aggravated with us because they get an unexpected bill. We get the unexpected bill too. And I would have to say that the cost on our side is probably significantly more if you add those 50 students into our budget, into a year with special needs. I mean, I think Melissa could probably talk better on that than I could, but we can't just look at this as, it's a three-dimensional picture, if you will. If we're looking at it one dimension, we're not seeing the whole problem, and we can't solve the issue. And I think we kind of jump off hook when the city jumps on us about something, but they also have to know that it affects us on our side drastically too. And again, I just want everybody to see that as a whole picture. You know, you're looking at one side of a picture that it's not fair to anybody to do so, and that's just my thoughts on that matter. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the point is that this is a multi-dimensional issue and a multi-dimensional problem, and I suspect that our friends on the municipal council would say that for any governing body, the only problems that get up to you are certainly for the superintendent, for the mayor, we don't really hear about the non-complicated problems. We assume that someone else takes care of those. As far as we know, they do anyway. Mr. Storrs and then Mrs. Sawyer.
I think the thing that's bothering me right now is that last year, if we had, for lack of a better term, overestimated by 230,000, we would have had no issues, and we wouldn't be looking to take money out of net school spending, which is going to affect the learning. Transportation, by law, is the responsibility not of the net school budget. But now we find ourselves in a position where we're going to have to affect that. And I think that's what frustrates me the most about this situation. So it almost seems like it behooves us to always estimate on the high side, or at a minimum, give a realistic budget and to let you know it could be as high as this, so that way down the road, nobody can say you didn't tell us.
Well, then that's the communication issue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I agree with you that it's the underlying issue is frustrating. It's shared by districts, and there's a limitation of what can be done about it. How we message this and the assurances we make, we have full control over, and mistakes have been made about those messages. There is no getting around that. Mr. Withers?
No, it was Ms. Sawyer.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Sawyer, I apologize.
Well, that's fine. I agree with Mr. Tyler and Mr. Storrs that the city needs to realize that the transportation fluctuates month to month, and they just can't come back at us and say, we're sorry, we can't help you, and they need to realize that until the end of the year, these figures may change. And that's just the fact.
I think that's true, and I think it's incumbent upon our administration to convey that message. But I believe the message that we have heard from the municipal government and that we will hear from the municipal government, I suspect, relatively soon, is that it's not the deficit, it's not the fluctuations, it's the fact that we were told there wouldn't be a deficit and there wouldn't be fluctuations, and that the planning that was done on the municipal side is based on those assurances. Now, if the municipal government is, we're coming in and saying, hey, make me this assurance, that's a different question. But having gone through this the number of times that we have, the message has been pretty consistent from the municipal government, and it essentially comes down to, are you sure this is what you need? And I think we have miscalculated in terms of responding to that question. So I think the point of this discussion, frankly, well, there is one other point of this discussion before we get to the bigger picture one. I'm sorry, Ms. Sawyer.
No, that's fine. We can't help it if a bus breaks down or someone else gets homeless. Those factors we can't control, and they need to realize that. Our fleet's aging, and it's those things we have no control over. And if something happens and we need to outsource more students on more buses, that's more of a cost to the transportation. And-
That's certainly true. The only thing I would add, because one way or another, this committee will one day focus on the big picture in the long term, I promise. We do have a responsibility for developing a vision that incorporates all of those types of challenges. And you're absolutely right. We have internally an aging fleet, and that issue needs to be addressed. And we've got to rack our brains to figure out what other issues we don't want future school committees to have to address, and future municipal governments for that matter, because it is our responsibility, as challenging as that might be. Mr. Larson?
Going back to one of the other points, just as to how this is gonna get closed, I think the wheels are already being put in motion for us to be covering whatever additional deficit we have.
That is definitely a pun.
What's that?
That is definitely a pun. I don't know why we keep.
Wheels.
The wheels are in
transportation.
motion?
The wheels are in motion? Oh, sorry. Wasn't
No,
meant
it's
to.
okay. It's allowed. I just-
Not half the people got it though, Bill, that's okay.
I didn't get it.
I didn't
so,
either.
I apologize.
So, whatever. I think we're gonna end up having to look at our own budget to find that deficit, from the memos that I've seen and from the action that I believe is being taken. We need to be looking at our own budgets to find a way to close that on our own side, whether we like it or not. I think that's a very real possibility that we're gonna have to deal with in the next few months, so.
Yeah, and I would wonder if Mr. Sheehan could speak to that point, because there is at least one,
That's the understanding that I walked away with from the municipal side as well. And so, moments after that meeting concluded, we started looking at that.
and there is at least one decision that has been made that we're going to speak in greater detail about May
Right.
5th. But if
And
you could,
and which was very distasteful, because you all know how I spoke with regard to the after-school buses. And to be able to, by the way, that number includes the $24,000. In other words, that number's not $24,000 less. That's already been deducted from the $59,000. That would have been,
Yeah, I'm sorry, so-
$24,000 more.
So 83,000 is really.
Right,
is that true?
that's true.
Yes.
Um, that does speak to the scope of this unpredictable
Yes, it
issue,
does.
but, okay, and, as Mr. Larson said, I don't think anyone on this school committee enjoys thinking about spending, net school spending dollars on transportation. But there is a reality that we have a responsibility to both account for all of our funding and communicate effectively how it is being used, what the potential challenges are, and when we don't know what they are, we have a responsibility to communicate about them. And when we fail at that responsibility, we put ourselves in a position where we have to make distasteful choices. The late bus is one of them, although, as we'll talk about on May 5th, I want to be very clear to families that are seeing themselves as being affected. The schedule for the late bus was to end imminently. The projected schedule was to end, so there is a limited impact to that, but that's because we haven't valued after-school transportation to the degree that we should when we're budgeting. So, but it's not that there was a robust after-school busing program that was supposed to take place for the next 2 months. It's ending, and again, we can talk about that next week, but I just want to be very clear that the impact of that is limited. Okay, are there any other questions or comments related to this issue? Just last point is, look, this is an issue, this is a problem, this is mistakes have been made, at a minimum with regard to communication. And as difficult as these conversations can be at times, we have a responsibility to address them. We're going to continue to address them, and frankly, when the municipal government is at times holding the school department, as they would any other department, accountable, we have to demonstrate to our partners in the municipal government that we're holding ourselves accountable, and that we're looking at these issues in a diligent manner and trying to avoid these types of problems, because when we find ourselves in them, if we want to have any type of argument of, to not dip into net school spending, we sure better have demonstrated due diligence on our part when they come up. And that is what this conversation's about, and it will be the same going forward. So we're going to move on from the topic. We are an hour and a half.
I just need to know, when is it gonna be presented to city council for permission for us?
Is there a time frame on that, Mr. Larson?
The mayor has formally asked the city council for that, and it's been assigned to subcommittee.
Okay, no timetable though.
I don't know when it's being voted out.
I will,
know it's been assigned- It has been assigned to the finance.
I'll contact
subcommittee.
President Cook and find out on a timetable. Has there been any communication as to whether or not representatives from the school side are expected to appear before the council to answer questions related to
No.
this? If there is,
They did.
just please let me know. But again, like, as there are a lot of reasons to be frustrated, but if it's happening in the schools, like, the buck stops in this room. We've all got to be clear about that. We will not be in a advantageous position if we look as though we're not taking responsibility for ourselves. So, all right, with that, as we prepare for the second item on our agenda, which is a discussion of the FY15 budget, a discussion that began in early April and will continue in the months ahead. As we've talked about, there are many different steps to this, but it'll take us a second, hopefully it takes a second to get the PowerPoint up, because I know tomorrow, this is our last telecast before the program on May 1st. So Dr. McCarthy, you're putting you on the spot. Could you just give us one last pitch about?
Sure. We're actually very excited. It's going to be televised as well. So double ACS is going to come and record the event so it can be played over and over again, and the community who cannot come will be able to see it. We've received a lot more RSVPs and a lot of interest in coming to the event. So
Okay, and the event is,
May 1st at Brennan
but what?
Library.
it
Oh,
is.
what is the event? Sorry.
It's a
Focus
great
on
event.
this. It's
When you get there, you'll find out what it is.
talking through difficult times. It's an event to help parents understand how to address challenging issues with their families, with their children, and we have a cast of support staff coming out to introduce themselves to the families so that they understand who they can connect with in the buildings if they do have challenges. It's one of a series of trainings that we hope to offer parents. So, yes.
I think a couple months back, we had mentioned possibly having written materials available for families that couldn't be there. Or is that still in
Yes.
the works, and are they?
We've
when are they
already,
available?
we have paper materials that we'll be handing out the night of, but
Okay.
we've already started development on a portion of our website
Okay.
that will be dedicated to this. So a copy of the PowerPoint will be up and all of the resources.
Okay.
So all of the handouts, all of the connections with local agencies, and then also a listing of all of our support staff by building, so families can easily know who to go to in their building should they have
Great.
that type of need. You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. McCarthy. Before I turn it over to the superintendent to walk through, and again, this is the committee's really third time through this budget, but it's one of the biggest things we do, and it certainly warrants the time. We've said many times that budgets serve multi-purposes, many purposes. A multitude of purposes is what I'm trying to say. They plan for the future in terms of the upcoming year and the governance of the district. They identify priorities. They help the committee and the administration advocate for the school system and the various initiatives and priorities that we hold dear. I think what I really want to commend the administration for, and I know that this is a budget process that's really come up through the buildings and the principals have involved and the various department heads, is that this budget, in a lot of ways, I think will serve as the foundation of the strategic plan that this committee will ultimately adopt, because it outlines a series of priorities and is consistent with a vision for a teaching and learning and student interest-centered district. And we want to go through it as quickly as you would go through it on the third time, because again, it is the third time. But particularly in the first slide, talking about the values that the superintendent has identified, I think that's always one of the most important parts of discussing something of this nature. So with that, with the gratitude of the committee for the work that's been done, and again, this will not, one way or another, this will not be the final number that is requested, but it's important to, frankly, it's not just about the number, it's about the priorities and how we plan for the future so we can eventually fulfill them. So with that, Mr. Sheehan?
As a representative of the entire administration in the Attleboro Public Schools, I very much appreciate your understanding that this budget was based on what the community, in fact, has asked for and said through the comprehensive assessment that was done last year. At the same time, it's also based on what is student-centered and student-centered philosophy, which this community wants the budget to represent. And the third piece is that it's based on that student piece as well as what are the needs of the district and what do we want for all of our kids, and to be able to educate every single one of our children who walk through our door. So we appreciate the fact that you understood when we produced this budget, this is based on all of those pieces. And in fact, we need to show you this. Now, do we think that this is realistic in such harsh economic times? No, we don't. But we would be remiss if we didn't share with you what we felt were the needs of this district in order to go and move forward. And we're going to do the very best job with the monies that are available to us. We promise you that. Bottom line is that you need to know right from the start what was on the plate, what did we look forward to, were we looking progressively towards in order to educate the children of Attleboro. And that was the task that I presented to all the administration in doing that.
And what will we get back to eventually? Because
And-
these
and-
priorities won't go away after.
Mr. Murphy, I've never heard it said by a school committee member and a chair, and I applaud you for the link from what that proposed, in this proposed budget is, to the Attleboro District Strategic Plan. And it has many of the same threads that are interwoven into this fabric. So it's very well said.
Okay.
So, in fact, we're here to look, in a discussion piece. We know we can't do everything that's on here, but we need to know from you, what is the priority of the school department? This is a conversation that takes place between the administration and the school committee as to what is the direction you want this budget to go in. And so we can come up with something that is, less than what has been presented, because we already know why it's been presented.
Right.
So, we know what is, and some of these things need a little bit further explanation, and I'm glad we have some people here who can speak to it, because there's 3 words in the 4th line of the R3T grant replacement. So what you don't know is that in the Race to the Top money and grant from Massachusetts, this district received $500,000 4 years ago to put forth all of the work with regard to 7 levers within this district. And each lever had X number of community members. You have a representative that was appointed as of last year in Bill Lawson. And so he sits here, so he knows, as of the committee meetings that he was involved in this 1 year, what some of those things are and how valuable it is. Because that money right there says, do we continue the work of 15 or 20 people in each one of the 7 lever committees and a steering committee that had been going on for 4 years? Because the funds have run out, does it stop at the closure of this school year? That's the amount of money.
Yep.
Now, that's not to say that if that was reduced, we have to go back to the drawing board, and Dave's chair of the HRPP, the Human Resource Pilot Program. We would have to go back to the drawing board. How then would we spend the allotted money? Do we combine different levers? So, that's one particular thing. So, I'll give you another example. The 2.5 FTE elementary specials, well, that really doesn't mean that much to the average person, except the $137,500 that we're requesting, in fact, resolved 2 grievances. One from the AEA, one from the paraprofessionals, and this allows us to have specialists by which are going to be with kids instead of being placed in a library with a non-teacher. So this is a compliance issue. So every single one of the pieces up there have a particular story, and the least of which all of you know, is $750,000 for the infrastructure, in which we have a lot of professionals involved in, as well as the commitment of this city to look at where we are technology-wise and how we're going to progress. And I've had conversations with many of you with regard to the last piece of assistant principals for the elementary schools as not just a training ground, but involving themselves in curricula, involving themselves in the special education piece, involving themselves with the evaluation piece, which is cumbersome right now for teachers, principals, because that's all they do, is evaluate.
Important to note that that's a variable that's changed, I think, that's.
Tremendously changed.
You know, 'cause
You're
there,
right.
there are people who have known elementary schools since time immemorial to not have assistant principals, but
Right.
as variables change, they need to be respond. In fact, because it's one of the positions, there is an added slide at the end of this presentation. I want to move on in a moment, so we can get into the consideration of the issues. But at the finance subcommittee level, the assistant superintendent offered an articulation as to the sort of rationale behind the assistant principals. At the school committee level, the superintendent offered one related to the importance of mentoring and leadership development, and I felt like they were two excellent justifications, rationales as to how this became a priority. And when we get to that slide, and again, it may be a little bit ironic because whether or not it'll still be there at the end of the discussion, but as the point we're trying to make here, this is a story. It's a story that continues well beyond this fiscal year, and I want to get to that point, but we
just
can
wanna
save
make
it until the
one
next
other
slide.
point with regard to that, because I'm hoping I don't forget it later.
Yep.
But you bring up a real good point about what was the elementary school 5, 10, 15 years ago in comparison. You have to remember, Dr. McCarthy and other people in this district made a commitment to develop special education programs that saved millions and millions of dollars in out-of-district cost. Those children, those services, those needs, those resources that are necessary are in those schools, but you've still only placed one administrator in the schools with all those added responsibilities.
Right.
So, you know, a long, long time ago, this district had many other central office administrators, curriculum coordinator, HR person, assistant superintendent, et cetera. And a system that has 5,000 teachers and the X number of personnel associated with this, and not to have an HR or a personnel director is unconscionable. And I don't care what anybody says, and I'll debate that with the people who decided this. You can't do this, with all due respect, with a couple of clerks that don't have the training and have that level by which to do this. The mayor and I completely agree that that position, in fact, really desperately needs to be placed into the school district. And we have those level services. We know, and some of us do more than others, that we're looking at a different way by which to provide a safe and learning environment for all of our kids. And so we're doing this in a committee and have been doing this since July. And the company that's associated with it, that ties us with the police department and fire department, called Be Safe, in fact, it's a $25,000 bill. But when you're taking a look at 6,000 kids in 9 buildings and divide it in that way, that's not a lot of money. There's an error on this slide. And the error, in fact, and I'm really upset with myself that I didn't pick this up. The top number of $1,184,721, that's accurate. The 2% raise that's requested, that is not $1.8 million. That, in fact, is the obligations plus the raise of 2% added together. So that item right now, with the most accurate figure, is 684.
Well, before this issue came up within the last 48 hours, I discussed it with I have discussed it with a couple of members of the school committee, and because there was some uncertainty as to the nature of the problem and the size of the problem, I have not yet communicated it to the school committee. Frankly, I looked at it. I looked at correcting it this afternoon, and because I mean, these numbers obviously need to be vetted, and we need to make sure that they are as accurate as possible. We owe that to the community. We owe that to our negotiating partners, and so there's an error. It's an error that's moving in the direction we like, which is nice when that happens. And it's one that we're going to have to address in the coming days. But I don't want to get into the specifics.
I just want you to know that that number is not accurate.
The steps and lanes are being double counted, but
Correct.
Given the significance of that error, I think we need to make sure, we just need to vet that whole slide, and
I
then we
agree.
will communicate publicly. But for that's also, by the way, when we get into some of these issues that we're going to talk about specifically, I think it is in our best interest to just avoid the personnel slide for the time being, and
Good enough.
we will go back to that.
So, when we looked at all the pieces, and again, the personnel needs piece has to be changed in the slide, and you're looking at a total of, it's more like $6,100,000, whatever, and it's not 11%, but we can look at what all of those things add up to. The bottom line is that we know realistically that we're not going to be able to accomplish a lot of those things, which then sets a brand-new priority for this school district in a very tough economic year. How do we go from here to there? The difficult part about your job and our job in developing a budget is that at the same time, we're trying to negotiate 7 different contracts. So that adds to the dilemma of what is really the number per piece.
Timing has just never been our
Not
specialty,
good so
but,
far.
So thank you for that, and I think we're at a point now where we can actually get into some of these line items that
Yeah.
need to be discussed. And as I said, personnel is essentially being moved over to the side for the time being. Transportation is being moved over to the side, and the level services are, and I hope will remain ultimately to the side. The focus, I would like the committee's focus and the slides are focused on to be largely positions. Positions are in there for good reason. There's been a rationale behind each one. We'll hear some more rationale momentarily. But as we said, this is coming in the context of negotiations with 7 bargaining units. It's coming in the context of a major budgetary shortfall. And it's coming in the context of measures being considered by the city council that frankly, an ask is being made of the community and we have to be mindful of that. I think that this committee, in a lot of ways, shares a set of values and a vision for the school system and what we want. We want students to be educated and be well-rounded, and we want them to be prepared to be productive citizens. There is, frankly, some differences of opinion with regard to the governing body's role in this stage of the budget process. We have members who have communicated that we are the advocates for education, and what we identify as the educational needs, that should be what the request would be. And frankly, I think the superintendent would be the first to say if we were going to take that to sort of its logical end, we'd be asking for an even bigger increase in terms of our educational needs. We have other members who make very sound points with regard to essentially we are partners with the municipal government and in the midst of a very difficult financial season. And we have a responsibility to demonstrate the degree to which we value our work as stewards of taxpayer dollars, and we need to cultivate a budget that is reasonable and within a range that can be realistic. I would say it may sound like I'm sitting on a fence, but to a certain degree that I am in this particular role. I think that the committee members who have those feelings, they're both right, and certainly neither are wrong. We are the advocates for education. We do need to champion the school system, and we also need to promote a narrative that is fiscally responsible. So with that, and as we move through the slides that we've gone through, and these are positions and these are requests. And the first one up is, I believe, the highest individual, monetarily the highest individual position, and I think the superintendent offered a very sound rationale that, but also, some caveats added to it. So, Mr. Withers.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy, and you hit on the one that I had circled, and I understand, Mr. Sheehan, that you're passionate about this position, and I understand, and I've heard from other administrators that you're understaffed in administration, and that there is a need for additional administration, and I don't doubt that. But what I would say is that, in looking at the financial situation we're in now, what we're going to have to ask our bargaining units, and what we're going to have to do as far as compensating our employees, I don't see how I could vote to approve a new position for $95,000 for a professional director, personally.
Mr. Storrs?
I think the thing that I'm finding difficult is in years past, the budget was always developed, or at least presented, where you start with, what we had last year, and then you try to determine where we're at as far as what we're gonna get, and determine at that point if there's a deficit and work from there. What we're doing here is we're adding things without realizing we're already in a hole before we even start thinking about adding things. That's what makes this so difficult right now. Look, if we had all the money in the world, let's get 10 personnel directors. But, we need to be realistic here of this is a bad year. We don't know if next year's gonna be a bad year or not, but we know this year is. We know that all three of the budgets up in Boston are the same, which means it looks like we're in a hole. So.
A big one.
Thank you. Right, a big hole. So the old way of doing it, where we start with net school from what we had last year and work our way from there, seems more viable, because that tells us where we're at. And then we can determine, can we add in these other things, or is that out of the question?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly understand the point, but I think the problem you've identified would be the problem with doing that process, because we know we're not even to identify where we are is behind where we need to be, and so the direction we would be going would be the opposite. I think I would agree with the administration's initial offering, I guess you could call it, because first of all, it was timely, and it needed to be. It may have actually been delayed a week now that I think about it, but it was timely. It was timely enough, and it was enough time for us to make these types of decisions that need to be made. And without doing that, I don't think we ever get to the point where we know where we're trying to go. And where we're trying to go is this district needs a personnel director. I agree with Mr. Withers. I don't think we're gonna have one for the start of the school year.
However, I absolutely agree with you. That doesn't mean that we don't, if it's that important in the school district, that it doesn't mean that we don't look at other avenues and other ways by which to fund.
And that's true,
This
that's gonna be
position.
true throughout this. That's
In other words,
there's no
setting a
question.
priority, how important is it in comparison to other things?
Yep.
Not increasing the current
Well, I
budget.
think that goes to a point that I think, I probably sound a little bit like a broken record, but the budget process is a year-long one. And in the life of the FY15 budget, it will be the administration's responsibility to identify where savings have been found, if that's possible, or restructuring can occur. And at that time, it will be the responsibility of the administration to come back to the school committee and say, because we've developed this plan, you have the option to create this position or to fund this program or whatever. But the stage we're at right now is we're trying to figure out how much.
And I understand 100%.
Yep, and I know, and I appreciate that.
You can't add positions of this magnitude and be asking for concessions on the other hand.
Right. Ms. Singer, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I guess maybe this is one of those. You had mentioned that, right now you have several clerks who do roles that they're really not trained
And
for.
Mr. Sawyer.
Well, I'll exclude him then in my comment. But, could you look at those and, if you hired a personnel director, then those people aren't doing, the personnel director's gonna do that job. And so
Correct.
then taking those salaries and you know what I mean? That's just a,
That's what I'm
Alternative.
looking at, Julie. That's, you're
that's what I figured.
right on the
but
money.
I just-
Okay, other comments or questions on the personnel director position? Mr. Tyler?
I would just say, I mean, I think the whole presentation was very well thought out, and we have a lot of needs. But we just have to look at the current picture that we're in, with this projected budget for FY15. We're not even gonna be able to make our obligations, if you will, that we already have in place. And so I think that anything that's added to this budget is going to have to really be sold to me in a very convincing way. We have a responsibility like everybody, a citizen and everybody else out there, to live within your means and make sure that you're taken care of before you want to add on to those. So, as much as I've been in support of a personnel director for the last couple of years, I believe it is a disgrace for this, district this size, not to have somebody centered. But I think the only way to achieve some of these other things is actually what Superintendent Sheehan just said. I think there has to be, and as Chairman Murphy said, it's an ongoing process, and if there can be a way of restructuring to fit those needs, but not adding to the bottom dollar before we're meeting our obligations, then I'm all for that. But I think anything that's gonna be put up on this screen tonight, that's in front of me, is gonna be hard to justify by not meeting our current.
The one thing I would say that, and we're gonna get through to the next in a minute, but some of these items, I think, they're larger than 95,000. And it may be the case that we have, in this instance, the personnel director is 95,000. We can't hire half a personnel director. Some positions, we may be able to do that. And some of the appropriations, we may be able to carve up a little bit. But for this one, I think I'm just gonna,
I make a motion to strike it from the budget.
Second. Any final discussion? Okay, so again, I'll make one point. This doesn't mean Attleboro will not have a personnel director. It means that it's not going to be in our FY15 request.
Just a quick
Mr.
comment to that. If Superintendent Sheehan and the administration feel it's that important, and they come back to us with a plan, then we could reconsider it. But as of right now, there is no plan.
And you're right, my motion should have been to strike it from the preliminary budget.
Well, all these, that's all these motions, so that's understood, but, and I would just say, a position of this magnitude, we're going to revisit it. We don't necessarily need to revisit it in this budget cycle, but it will be revisited. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on. Okay, this one, frankly, I think is a little more difficult because of the compliance issues that have been identified by the administration.
I think it's 2.5, am I correct? That's not two, it's 2.5.
It is 2.5. It is,
2.5.
you're absolutely right about that. It's 2.5, full-time elementary
Total amount is
schools,
correct.
specials teachers. I would say that this is a very multi-dimensional budget item. It has an impact on the scheduling of our elementary school day and the workload. Sorry.
I need to be very clear that we need 2.5 more next year, no matter what we do. So really what you're deciding between is whether or not to, request this increase so that we can just go out and add these people, or if we take this off the list, which I understand that that's something that has to be considered, what that's gonna mean is that we're going to have to reallocate staff from other places in the district to put them here, because we will have 2.5 more next year. It's an absolute necessity to run our elementary schools next
Okay,
year.
and I think Mr. Story has made valid points, and, again, at the end of the day, if the appropriation we get does not allow for any of these things, there'll have to be changes made in June and July. But for right now, again, largely we've got compliance issues, we've got implications for the rest of our staff, and frankly, we've got some educational issues as well. So I'm just gonna, in fact, we don't really need a motion because this is in there right now. And so,
Can I ask some questions about clarification
Sure.
on this, please? My understanding is that this has to do with one of the specials, correct? Right, and for those who may not know, or for those at home, the way it works at the elementary school, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, is that there's 5 different specials, which means every day a class gets a different special. And during that specials time, 45 minutes or whatever it is, the teacher is given their development time, which is contractually required, and they need it
Right.
to be able to plan for the days. In one of the cases, it's a paraprofessional who is responsible for that, that special.
Correct.
So the issue was that they were quote-unquote teaching.
Right.
So, understanding this situation and which special we're talking about, what is the difference between teaching, as it's being defined here, and what would normally go on in that special? I guess, I'm trying to say it semi-cryptically without conflicting.
You can't place a group of students with a paraprofessional, untrained, and does not have a teaching license to act on their own, to teach or supervise. They have to be under the supervision of a teacher.
What about during lunch?
It's different, they're not teaching.
Right, so that's why I asked the question about what is teaching.
Lunch period, in fact, is supervisory.
Yep,
But even those people in the lunch period are under the supervision of someone with a certificate.
okay.
So the specificity of this is that you can't put 25 kids in the media center to be taught by a paraprofessional without a teaching certificate that doesn't say library science.
So they can be supervised during lunch and during recess by a paraprofessional,
Yes.
but they cannot be supervised reading a book in the library by a paraprofessional.
Correct, because that's not under the direct instruction or the immediacy of a certified teacher.
It's instructional time. So it would 100% be considered
Right.
teaching. All right, that's what I needed.
a fair question. Ms. Singer, do you have
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll make a motion to retain the 2.5 full-time elementary school special teachers.
Second?
Any further discussion?
My discussion is, they give a big speech, and then the next thing comes up is a compliancy issue.
It is, well, there's both.
And that's what I say, you have to sell me on these ideas, but,
This is a request, there might not be money for this, but I'm just letting you all know that that's gonna cause a reallocation of staff, because
Yep.
there has to be an increase to the specials. That's happening no matter what.
No matter.
The reality is, this is a reality budget.
Yep.
And the reality is that 2.5 teachers may have to be laid off in order to complete this task, if there is no money in the budget.
There are, for each one of these slides, there's
It is a downside.
implications and an echo effect and everything
Right.
else. So the motion has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
I,
Motion passes. Okay, the student service coordinator. My understanding is that although listed at $75,000, this might be one where we're able to take some degree of a hybrid approach. Is that accurate? And Dr. McCarthy, could you speak to that?
Sure, so just be clear, this is a special education position. It's a position that we asked for last year as well. It's a legal expert in special education laws and compliance. It's somebody who's out in the buildings and helps guide the teams to make sure they're compliant. They're consulting with the principal, they're consulting with myself. And if we had enough FTEs of student service coordinators, we really would be cutting off many of our compliance issues that we have. Many of the cases that attorneys get involved in, I have to go to mediation for, these have become problematic. If we had enough of FTEs of this position, that individual would be able to cut off many of those problems and also strengthen our programming. It's somebody, the job description is to provide professional development, so both on-site in the classroom and then during our PD days. So it's something I see as crucial. It is, we have 3.5 FTEs of student service coordinators right now. We used to have a whole other FTE. It was something that's been taken away, and we have, seen the impact of it. The person who's covering 6 buildings, working till all hours of the night is just spread extremely thin, and I feel like it's essential in order for us to be compliant.
Okay, and am I correct in the sort of the various conversations I've had in various meetings over the last few weeks that there may be a way of retaining this position in our budgetary plans, but softening the economic impact?
Sure, that's asking for a full FTE.
Okay.
And so if we were able to ask for less, we would make it work, and it's much better than we have right now. So if it was something that you felt that we
Like to hear
could
it right
reduce, we will, anything would be helpful.
Okay, what was represented to me in part of the discussions earlier in a subcommittee meeting was that half of this sounds really neat, but I guess if it makes sense, if we're considering it as a potential half-time position, but it would be to essentially slice this in half. Is that was the understanding that I walked
That
away
would be, I'd be grateful for that.
with. Okay. Ms.
I
Harris?
just have
No?
sorry. Last year, we hired a director of student services. And
Mhm.
so I'm just curious if, we've hired a director and now we have a student services coordinator that we need. Have we really just looked at?
So the weird part about this position is if you look in our contract, it's called special education coordinator. And then the job description is for a student service coordinator. And so there's this discrepancy amongst what the person actually does and what their job title is. So it causes confusion, these individuals work out of the special education office. They attend special education meetings. They work directly with families. They consult directly with teams. And I don't know why they're called this.
Probably because the school committee didn't vote to change it.
So just.
So it causes, and also my title is Director of Special Education and Student Support Services. So I think that's where this came from, and it's a fair question.
Well, it sounds like there's a bigger issue we need to
Right,
address in terms of
exactly,
job
just the-
descriptions and job titles, and we will get to
Yeah,
that.
that's
Mr. Tyler?
I would just suggest that we table this position right now so we can get a clearer picture of the financial impact on the budget. If we're talking that it may be less money than the 75,000, I mean, I just think it's something we should be dealing with later, that's all.
Mrs. Torres?
So here's the thing, just because we're approving now doesn't mean it's a done deal. It means that we're gonna put it into the budget and see. Is that a fair statement?
Well, the approval of the budget is a vote that takes place subsequent to the appropriation made by the city. What the part in the chronology that we're at right now is preparing to make our request.
Right.
And so we, as part of our responsibility in communicating our request, is explaining to the community and to the municipal government how this money would be spent if approved. If it is approved at a lower number, which we are all expecting to some degree, there are contingency plans in place that will address that. There's a floor in Massachusetts that means that it's not going to go beneath the net school spending number. In this issue, as we all know, there are various measures under consideration to try to identify that issue, identify an issue there and address it. So we have, I'm sorry, Mr. Willis?
You finish.
That's, I'm sorry.
I just, yeah, so I want to, so I guess what I'm trying to say is if we, because it sounds like it could be a compliance-related issue, if we were to, at this time, vote a half FTE on that position, it doesn't, it just means that it's going to go into the proposed budget, and then we're going to have to look at it later.
That's correct.
And ultimately, at some point, if we have a deficit, as you just said, we expect, then it's up to the administration to come to us and say, that half is so important that this is how we will compensate it.
Yep, that is correct.
So there's really no
Is that-
necessary negative to doing something that we feel is important.
I think that's an accurate statement. Does that address your concern?
That
Mr. Chair?
addresses my concern.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to reduce the student service coordinator request in the preliminary budget to $37,500.
Second.
I'll be louder next time.
I was gonna say that, but any further discussion? Mr. Willis?
When you talked about the two different kind of ways that people look at the budgeting issue, I fall on the second side, which is that we have a responsibility to be somewhat realistic.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that we go in and say, okay, we're probably gonna get X amount of dollars, let's present a budget of that amount. We need to present something higher, we need to, figure out really what a realistic budget is. But that also means that we have to present something to them that, is, they're not gonna look at and laugh at, they're not going to think that we're trying to take advantage of the situation. We really need to, have, cut some things out, frankly. And, looking at a new position, again, I don't think that we should leave it in. I think this is something that we should cut out personally. And I say that having, with you having made, I think, a very strong argument for it, and I'm glad it's in there, but I think at this point, we need to be looking to get this number lower, and a $75,000 or $37,500 if we do half is the way to do it.
Yep, no, it's to the tune of 37.5, there's no doubt about that. I would just say that I completely understand the concern. It's a tempting one to agree with, but I'm going to avoid the temptation because I think at this stage, I think the slicing it in half, in my view, it speaks to that concern, but I can certainly see where someone would be on the other side of that. Mr. Tyler?
And I would just have to agree with that. I don't want to add any new positions either. I totally agree with this. But the word compliancy has to mean a big deal. When we talk compliancy now, when we're not adhering to a compliance or a contractual obligation, it usually ends up costing us a heck of a lot more than what the administration is putting forward to us to stop this problem, if you will. So, and I agree with you, Steve. I fully agree with you. But compliancy issues, I think we need to have a little bit of latitude, that's all. It's my opinion, but again, Steve, I couldn't agree with you more. We need to show the public that we are serious in what we're doing here, and I believe everybody is, but it's kind of tough to say that we want to hire somebody and we have a deficit. So I can understand that fully, but.
I think it's the nature of a $63 million budget is there tend to be very valid points on both sides of issues. Mr. Shin?
I think it's the nature of what is the priority in the district when you're talking about law, regulation, and contract. And at the same time, to use your words and terms, this may cause us to look at some of the special education pieces to restructure in order to accomplish the task.
Mr. Willis?
I guess a question for any of you up there, I guess, we're talking about priorities, and that's really what we're trying to do, is prioritizing these things that we know some we're unfortunately gonna have to cut, some are gonna leave in there that might get cut later, some, we'll fight tooth or nail for, or we'll move money around to make sure it happens. Where, on a scale of 1 to 10, how high a priority is a half time? I guess that would go a long way.
This is a high priority for
Okay.
me. As we talk about, we sit here and we talk about the out-of-district transportation budget. Every one of those students that go out of district, I know that 60% of our students that go out of district, I know what type of programming they need. It's social, emotional, behavioral. In order to build that programming, we need individuals who can help oversee those programs and guide the staff. it's a challenge to build successful programs without the staff to be able to guide those programs. So you can see down the road how this pays off. If you have the right staff who can train and oversee the programs, then you're not transporting students out of district, you're not paying for out of district placements. And so you while you're spending a little money, you also know that down the road that will be creating, one, an environment where kids can go to school in their own community, and then two, there will be savings on that end. So in order for the department to continue to grow, to meet the needs of what our kids need, I see this as essential. If we don't, I fear that we'll see more kids going out of district. We'll see the transportation going up. We'll see the out of district going up. So it really is something I feel very strongly about that we do need. So.
Mr. Sheen, I wonder, this is not happening for this year. A lot of these things aren't. Not the position. I'm about to make another point. Imagine if members of the community, when they want to look at the school budget, not just spreadsheet after spreadsheet, or even a well put together but admittedly brief PowerPoint. Perhaps the school department should really be presenting a budget in a much more narrative form, because I wonder if someone sees student service coordinator 75,000 or 37,500. The idea that could be followed with the type of narrative that Dr. McCarthy just conveyed, I think could potentially have a real impact, and not necessarily in the short term. But if anyone hasn't noticed yet, school committees don't have a big impact in the short term too frequently. But I do wonder if perhaps that's a direction we might want to think about as we look ahead to FY16, and as we revamp all of our communication strategies, which is something we need to do, finding a way that really sort of becomes part of the norm, that not a list of numbers, but really numbers with a narrative. But that's really more food for thought, and it is 9:45, so you should feel free to respond via email tomorrow. All right, so is there any other comments? There is a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. The motion is to reduce to by 37,500 to 37,500 for this position. All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? And
Dr. McCarthy convinced
I
me.
was trying to figure out if it was appropriate to make that joke, and I decided.
I don't know, she almost convinced me to put up the whole thing, but I'll just leave that.
So then I'm glad she stopped talking.
Well, your return on investment there was,
It's
true,
a-
those numbers
And
actually
And again, we're
is
gonna
exactly
revisit.
what-
We're gonna revisit the issue.
Absolutely correct.
So, we should definitely revisit.
Okay, Dr. McCarthy, now convince us in this one, please.
Science is not my area of expertise, Steve.
Okay, so the K-12 science coordinator, Mr. Sawyer,
Yeah, I mean, as
the body language doesn't.
I know,
Doesn't.
it's
It's
not
not
selling.
boding well. For
I can't make as strong an argument, unfortunately. I mean, I think as a district, we value science, and this is a subject that has not received the same level of attention as English and math, and it has suffered, unfortunately, as a result. And, without someone to coordinate the efforts of our science educators, it's going to continue to lag, and this is a great need for a very, significant subject.
Yep. I think like many pieces in this budget, when the strategic plan is ultimately adopted, this is going to be a big part of it, because we need to do a better job with regard to this. It's no secret why the positions of the ELA and math have received the attention of this school district and many others over the last 20 years. There's a rationale behind that too, and I'm not attacking it, but it's not like you have to really decipher and figure out why do districts decide to prioritize those two.
A district of this size should have a expert science educator, overseeing the work of this.
But at the same time, they should have an expert history social studies coordinator, and a music and fine arts coordinator, and a physical education health coordinator, and a technology director coordinator. That was one of the positions I left before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough.
And don't shortchange yourself, Mr. Sawyer. I think you did a good job explaining
Thank
it. And if it was a different budget year,
Yeah.
I'd love to stand behind you. I know it's a need, but I have to make the motion to remove the K-12 science from the upcoming budget, or preliminary budget.
Second. Any further discussion? And again, I'm sorry, Mr.
I just have one. Who currently does that? Does anybody have pieces of it? nobody does any
But,
part of it.
well,
Oh.
except that, am I
Somebody's gotta
correct
do
in saying
something.
that as part of the grant, there are team leaders that are, and is that in any way fulfilling their responsibility?
We do have lead teachers who are doing some curriculum work,
Mhm.
but ultimately I'm overseeing science.
Mr. Withers?
Have we ever had a science coordinator district-wide?
Yes, briefly.
Long time ago or fairly recent?
Not that long. I'd say 5 years ago.
Briefly?
Yeah. Well, actually, the position came and went a couple times over the course of my career, but we haven't had one in a good 5 years.
Mrs. Sturz?
So, I mean, I absolutely agree, raging about it for years, that science has taken a back seat to math and ELA, and as Mr. Murphy already explained, but is it possible that for a stipend type situation could be used to at least enhance what we have now?
We currently have that.
It's already in place,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a modest stipend, and
so it's not,
without time in the day to do the work, it's more about coordinating the PD for the teachers, and writing curriculum, which is what the PD is. So we're very lucky to have some people who are taking that on, and it's thankless because they really yearn for the kind of leadership that this position would give them.
Yeah. No, it's an institutional need. There's no question about it. And one of the things that I find so frustrating, and it's why I sort of harped on the when you said it existed briefly, is that until a district commits to making these types of things priorities, they don't become the type of sustainable commitments that are just ingrained in the school culture. And we see it, one of the ones that we see it all the time is foreign language. And, and I don't necessarily encourage references to our own educational experiences because they, education changes at such a fast pace. But, I went to middle school in Attleboro, and throughout 7th and 8th grade, foreign language came and went 3 different times. Not in the schedule, just like the late bus. Like, it was there, and then the next day it wasn't there. And I think that, the idea that a position, at one time existed and all of a sudden it doesn't, and then maybe it does for a little bit, it speaks to the degree to which, we need to think long-term and find a way to make a really serious and sustained commitment. But I agree with Mr. Tyler that, unfortunately, now I don't think is the time. So, is there any other discussion with regard to the science coordinator? Okay, so the motion is to eliminate this position from the budget. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm gonna vote opposed.
Mr. Larson votes opposed. Abstentions? And the motion passes. Moving on. Okay, so as promised, we do have some budgetary items that are, I would say, are of the size that we may want to think a little more creatively in terms of, I think these are ones that require a scalpel, frankly, or potentially, at least I should say, not all of them, but these are, well, why don't our administrators speak to where this came from?
We had, we started the process back in December, Mr. Chair, members of the school committee, and we asked all the principals to develop their estimates as to what they really feel they need, not their wish list. Long story short, all the schools combined came on with a list of a little over $1.8 million for their needs, whether it be in regard to personnel, most was personnel, but in certain cases might have been materials, supplies, whatever. When we got together to determine what recommended budget are we going to make, there was no way we could submit $1.8 million on top of everything else. So to be very honest with you, we split it in two, $900,000, and put in $300,000 at each level, being $300,000 for elementary, $300,000 for the middle schools, and $300,000 for the high school.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I guess my question is, this is a request. It's beyond the level services. It certainly can't be expected at this point. But my inference would be that if they can't have a request for $900,000, a lesser amount would still be valued and appreciated at the building levels. Is that a fair point?
Yes.
Is there does anyone want to speak in favor of the $900,000?
I have a question about it.
Sure, Mr. Storrs.
So, you indicated that the majority of this was personnel, correct?
Correct, yes.
So, help me with that, because I'm imagining each of these schools right now with staffed at level services, and, you know, $900,000 of increased mostly personnel. I mean, are we talking mainly teachers here, paraprofessionals? What would you say is the summary of what they were looking for?
Yeah.
The primary thread were teachers, and it was in regard to possible increase in class sizes.
Yeah, this is the difference between having class sizes of 27 in a grade and class sizes of 23.
And I think we all agree class sizes are important, but what it really comes down to in a year like this, where we're already starting in a hole, we have to go with the contractual, you know,
Right, but I mean,
limitations.
there are, I mean, specific grades in specific schools where the projections for next year are, you know, tight, where a handful of kids moving in over the summer can go between being within contractual limits and not. And so I think some of these requests where we know, you know, based on what we know today, we say, well, we can get by with 4 teachers in that grade next year. You know, they're saying, well, if you tell me what I think we need, even if I had 4, the numbers are too high for what I think is sound. So I'm asking for that 5th teacher in that series of requests. So, you know, we understand these are requests. We all understand how this plays out, but these aren't just, again, this isn't like, it would be really nice to have. I mean, these are things that,
But it raises the most valuable points that they recognize the fact that class sizes in some grades are really high. And an influx of 5 or 6 kids, you don't think is that much until it raises the class size beyond the contractual limits.
Yeah.
And that doesn't bother you as much as what is the learning atmosphere associated with it. That's when they bring to our point. But for your point, and we share it as well, well, if we add a teacher there, we may be subtracting a teacher somewhere else in order to accommodate that. We're back to priorities in the district. Priorities that are based on law, regulation, and contract. And that's where we're gonna end up in this.
Yep. Ms. Singer, you had a question?
I just wanted to point out that the original request was 1.8, and you already cut that in half. I just
Right.
wanted to
Oh,
clarify that
I've
to you.
heard that.
Okay.
Oh,
I just wanted-
absolutely. But just
When you
like,
said personnel, they, you know, they.
well,
did cut.
he indicated that of the 900,000, the majority of it was personnel.
A lot of it was.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, I think it speaks to the life of a budget, that the budget starts, you know, amongst our professionals, and again, we always trip up on terminology here. I do not like the term wish list. I understand why it gets used, you know, but goals, priorities, and just, you know, things that we need. I mean, all of it applies. In this instance, I feel $900,000 is not realistic, and speaking to some of the concerns that have been articulated. Is there I mean, I think for purposes of the preliminary budget, and I think we should also a point to make, all of these motions are controlling with regard to the preliminary budget that's ultimately passed from the school committee to the municipal government. But just like some of these numbers are estimates, it is the charge to the administration to develop the budget that is reflective of the committee's wishes. So, for purposes of making our intentions clear, I would say the reduction, and it sounds like there's going to be one since no one spoke in favor of the 900,000, is, I would say, 3 options: that we go 300,000, which is a third, and with each level getting 100, 450,000, which would cut it in half and give each level 150, or 2/3 and go with a $600,000. Does anyone want to, before a motion is made, anyone want to speak in favor of any of those 3 options, or one that I didn't mention?
Could I ask a question?
Of course.
So the administration, knowing our budget situation and that this is a request, what would be your recommendation? I mean, obviously, you know, the 900,000 is unlikely.
My recommendation would be that you do not divide up the money into 3 categories, that you prioritize, administratively, you prioritize what is the most effective way by which to provide services to kids throughout the district.
So that may, if the number is $300,000 and it's all needed at the middle school, then that's where we need to be able to spend it.
That's fair,
I-
that's a fair point. Very fair
So,
point.
you know, I think we need to recognize in the preliminary pieces of these budgets that we are going to inevitably come to a point next September or late August that the class sizes are beyond contractual and reasonable limits that we have to hire another teacher for that school. And I'd like to have some money in the budget by which to be able to do that.
Yeah, well, we certainly would too, except that, the only caveat to that is this being a request beyond the level services, we're not sure, we don't know what'll be there. But your point is well taken. Mr. Larson?
I think for the purpose of the discussion that we're having tonight, I think tabling this one to a later date. I mean, I'm a little I mean, I certainly understand where the numbers come from. I'm a little uncomfortable with just approving to, continue on the process of a number that we really don't know what it's gonna be used for.
And I think.
And, I mean, I certainly know that there will be things coming up that we're gonna need the money for. We don't know what that is right now. So I think tabling that for right at this point, knowing that we're gonna have to add it into some part of the preliminary budget, I'm just a little concerned without knowing exactly how it's gonna be spent, sending it forward.
I agree, but I agree with the reservation, but to me, the question is, do we take all 900,000 out, and then an argument could be made to add it back in between now and the time it goes to the city council? Because I think that right now, particularly with our public hearing coming up, I am very concerned about, I want to be able to present a realistic, authentic picture to the public when they make comments to us. But I am not opposed to, if an articulation comes back with the priorities, adding it back in subsequent to that. Mr. Larson?
Well, I think with all the other requests that we're making for everyone else to take concessions and the rest of it, my recommendation would be to take the if we're not gonna table it, my recommendation would be to take the 900 off completely at this point, and then wait for a further recommendation from the administration at a later point.
With some specificity
With some-
added to it, knowing what the numbers are.
Exactly.
I would have to second that.
I
I
mean,
don't think it's actually, is it an actual motion? Mr. Strauss?
I mean, ultimately, if class sizes go up beyond the contractual limits, you guys are gonna have to come to us with budget transfers to be able to hire that FTA to close that gap, correct? I mean, that would be the normal process. If we have a budget that's been established, we get to September, October, November, whatever it is, and all of a sudden those class sizes go up beyond the 28, you guys need to get those class sizes down into contractual limits. You need to come to us and say, we need to transfer money from these line items over to here to personnel so that we can hire an extra FTE to deal with that, correct?
And pray that you come into some form of good year, whatever you take it from, or you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul.
Absolutely, but that's the problem with this budget is it's always gonna be that.
Right.
Okay.
But on the onset, it potentially is about, at this stage maybe, doing exactly what Mr. Lawson said, getting more specific numbers, et cetera, and being able to do that. And at least we'd have an idea, a better feel.
See, I think my concern is increasing the budget that we have a hearing on is a lot more difficult than scaling back from the budget that we have the hearing on.
Well, I don't know if it is or not. I mean, I think that one of the nice things about the process is it's long enough where there can be fluctuations. I like Mr. Larson's point that we would like some greater specificity. I think that point is extremely well taken, and I think if a valid argument is made, I think this committee.
The question is, do you want a placeholder for what you know will happen? Every summer, I mean, the district is busting its seams. In every building, there's at least one grade or area where the sizes are right up against the maximums. And so every summer, and we're never quite sure where it will be, somebody, goes over, and we, have to move things around to hire
Yep.
someone. So this would be money put aside for that purpose, so that you have money to go to, so that you don't have to, lay somebody off in some other place to make that move or to take it from some other line. So that's what's under consideration here. And I can understand to say, well, we don't have the money for it, so it's, no.
Yep.
That's certainly worth considering. But if you were to leave money, some amount in there, I mean, while I can't tell you which grade and which school, I can tell you specifically we'd be earmarking that money to pick up the slack that certainly will be needed over the summer.
Okay, hold 1 second, I'm sorry. Mrs. Sawyer was up first, Mr. Withers, Ms. Singer.
I think that we should think of this as like the transportation issue where we should just set aside some money so that later on, we're not scrambling, trying to find where we're gonna find this money. And so that we have it earmarked, like they said, so that we have something like in the budget.
Can I just a quick question to Mr. Larson and Mr. Tyler. Would it have any impact on your concerns if the motion was made to approve a reduced number with the restriction that it be used specifically for personnel needs that are demonstrated to the committee? Would that be any more palatable?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I'm saying, I'm looking for a little bit more detail than just a 6-digit rounded off number
Yeah.
to the
No.
closest $100,000.
Good point.
You know,
They-
I'm funny that way, sorry.
You sound like a guy who runs a business.
And I agree with you, Bill, and Jim, I just have to disagree a little bit about the mentality that what I'm thinking. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We're having yes, no's, and maybes tonight. There's definite things that we want to do, so we're voting on it. That's what the vote's for.
Yeah.
There's things that we want, we don't want in there, we're voting for it, they're out. And there's these maybe issues. Give us a little bit more information. Not, I don't think I'm against it, I know Bill's not against it. We're looking for a more definitive number, what the need's going to be, and whether or not that needs to be reduced to fit into the budget. So I'm not saying no in any way. shape,
Or impose restrictions that require
Exactly.
greater specificity,
Exactly.
specificity to be made. Mr. Withers was next, but is it
respond.
directly responsive?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I was trying to say is this, a yes right now isn't a yes, we are gonna have that in our budget. It's yes, it's going to be place held in the budget so that the when we find the deficit that we know is coming, the administration has to come to us and fight for that and explain to us where they're gonna take from Peter to have Paul. So I don't see a maybe. A maybe is the same thing as a yes right now, because it's nothing more than placeholding priorities. And ultimately, we know we're gonna have to scale back later on.
There's a little bit of semantics in this sense. One, a lot of this money might never show up. And two, we could vote to change it, 48 hours from now.
Sure.
So like, it's a certain degree, that maybe is kind of, I think, the operative word. But Mr. Withers was next, and then Ms. Singer.
Do you have a good estimate as to what we generally need to cover the increased staffing due to class sizes?
That's a good question.
The 2 years that I've been there in July, it's been, about three or four people
Three or four people?
And a
Per-
number,
across the district.
okay, so that would be 100 and, no,
What number do we use?
60,000,
60,000.
44 for salary and 16 for benefits. 60,000.
So that's
someone
240.
else has to do it, I'm a little.
240.
now. 240.
So, I mean, I would be in favor of doing the 300. That gives you some wiggle room. I mean, we have a reason why we're presenting it. We're cutting 600,000 off what we're presenting to the city council, but for a problem we know is gonna come up, we have
Yep.
enough money to cover it.
Okay, and I agree with that point personally, but Mr. Larson's and Mr. Tyler's concerns really do resonate with me. So, does anyone want to offer? Would there be any opposition? And there will be in a second, when we vote, but about imposing the restriction that this particular line item, for the time being, will only be utilized if the administration demonstrates the personnel need to the committee. Now, we can vote to change it, but we're also imposing a restriction on ourselves that this money is essentially, we're earmarking it for the school committee to use to reduce class size on the recommendation of the administration. Does that make sense? And are we?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll make a motion to reduce this budget item to $300,000 and add the stipulation that it will only be utilized if the administration makes a case that the school committee views as compelling, that it will, in effect, reduce class size and be used for personnel across the district.
Second.
Administration, any objection to how we've structured this?
I appreciate it.
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. By the way, I think I've realized that there's a slide missing, so we'll, oh, no, there isn't, never mind. The elementary school assistant principals, and again, I previewed this earlier, but I thought that our top two educational leaders, Mr. Sheen and Mr. Sawyer, both hit upon different but extremely compelling points to this line item that's about to be on the chopping block. So, if they could each offer the instructional leadership example that Mr. Sawyer used, and that's a little bit of a broader term that I should use, and the leadership development that Mr. Sheehan talked about. I think we need to keep these things in mind and essentially record them, because eventually, you've certainly convinced me, we need assistant principals at the elementary school. So.
It's no different than our personnel director piece. Yeah, you know, if potentially teachers could be laid off or anybody laid off, to hire administration at this particular time sends the wrong message, the wrong thing to do. We're just gonna have to limp and go on and find other ways by which to do this right now. Our point of putting it out there to begin with is well established of the reasons why. And we absolutely need these, but right now, with the potential deficit and the financial situation in the city, now is not the time.
Yeah. I'm just, Mr. Sawyer, if you could just talk, again, I think you did a good job a couple weeks ago really identifying the variables that have changed with regard to the teaching and learning side.
I wish we could, at 10 past 10, we go to the tape on now. And I think I said the job has changed significantly over, as a result of the age of accountability. And one, just the range of expectations for principals has significantly increased. Two, the evaluation responsibility. You know, in other buildings, there's more than one administrator to share the load. Our elementary principals have to evaluate roughly 40 people by themselves, which is an unrealistic expectation, just for that part of it as well, alone. And then on top of that, they're facing challenges in the elementary schools that have not been faced in the past, that are new challenges that we spend a lot of our time working on, trying to help them. And for them to provide the teachers the support that the teachers want, they need help, they need more time.
Okay. And I've tried to be more presiding amongst this discussion, but there is a case has been made to me since the beginning of my time at the school committee that there is one unique need at the elementary school level amongst the 5 buildings.
Yes.
And I'm inclined to make that motion and then defend it, and you know the committee can see fit to do what they want. But could you please speak to that issue?
Sure, and I'm going to ask Marissa to help me on that. But you know, all of our schools need this, but I have to say that the level of need varies, just like everything else varies. And Thatcher Elementary School is the place where there is by far the greatest need, and it has in part to do with the size of that building. It has in part to do with other things that are in that building, but it also has a little bit to do with some of the programs that we have placed at Thatcher, which maybe Marissa wants to speak to.
Sure. So the principal of that building right now, Principal Zinni, she has really taken it upon herself to be the principal for both the ELC and Thatcher, which is terrific, and the entire building has leadership right now. What that means from a special ed perspective is that on a yearly basis alone, she has the principal has over 230 IEPs just to read and sign off on. The ELC has 153 students with special needs, and then Thatcher has 81 students with special needs. Where we're talking other elementary buildings have between 65 to 80. And that's what we're asking of the building principals. We're asking that principal to read 230 IEPs, to attend that many more meetings, to offer guidance on that many more complicated programming, that there's additional staff that come with special ed programs. So not only do they come with a teacher, but there's often paraprofessionals that that principal needs to evaluate as well. So her time is being spent significantly working 7 days a week to make sure that all of the needs of the students in that building are being met, and it is significantly higher than our other buildings.
Okay. And the point that I would just make, again, as I said, in defense of this, is that, and I'm making it only for one, which again, I think speaks to our commitment to reduce the numbers responsibly. But I think that the needs that the administration has just articulated are known and felt at Thatcher Elementary School. And there's no doubt in my mind that they are not felt to a lesser degree at the other buildings. Maybe they're felt to the same degree, but I think they exist to a lesser degree. I think that I agree that eventually we need elementary school principals. I agree that we are certainly not going to have 5 next year, and I don't expect to have any. I think ultimately this is one of those issues that when the final numbers come in, it's unlikely to have $95,000 to commit to this, at least in the beginning of the year. But I think that part of the way we demonstrate the sort of seriousness with which we see this issue, because it is a teaching and learning issue, and I rejoice whenever we find ourselves talking about one when that happens. And I think that we can send the message that if it's step by step, if it takes 5, 7, 8 years, eventually we need to get to a place where we have an appropriate amount of instructional and educational leadership. And I think that's a message that the staff and families of Thatcher need to hear, and the ELC. And I think it helps us make one step forward, getting toward the goal that the administration has thankfully identified. So those are my thoughts. I appreciate the committee's allowing me to go first with articulating them. Mr. Storrs.
You know, if we were to approve just the one position for the specific reason that was explained, I think I would lean more towards a different title than assistant principal. And I know it's semantics, but it's because we have 5 elementary schools and one gets an assistant and principal while the other 4 would not. But there's a reason behind it. So it seems like the title, if we even get to that point, and that's a long way between now and there, I think the title should indicate the specificity of the of that building situation.
I think that's a fair point. The only thing I would say, the 2 things I would say in response. One, I think that they've made the argument that we need to eventually get to 5. And so by having 1, part of the message I think we send is we're trying to take that one step forward to eventually have them at Hyman Fine, Willett, Studley, and Hill Roberts. The second thing is, and the administrators would have to speak to this, I don't know what implications there are with regard to evaluations, that the responsibility that they're looking to vest in this position is administration in nature. And I know there are some limitations as to what exactly it could be called in order to execute those responsibilities. Is that fair?
In order to evaluate a teacher and be able to sign off on that evaluation, you have to have the certificate of being an assistant principal or a principal. So you have to have the ticket to begin with.
So that would be the requirement of the director of blah, blah, blah position.
Yes, except
that's all
that
I'm
from a marketing standpoint, someone who's obtained a certificate, I imagine, wants to have the title. But I'm sorry, Ms. Singer?
No, I agree with you in terms of, I think the 5 is a little much to ask for in this budget season. I agree that the 1 at Thatcher is, I'm in full agreement with that. I think it should stay titled as an assistant principal for the reasons that Chairman Murphy said, but also, you have expectations set on that role and show the outcomes that individual produced in the last year, and it just strengthens your case for the other 4 in the years to come. But I don't think that we should change the title of it.
Mr. Larson, Mr. Tyler.
Every time I'm in Thatcher, I'm always amazed by, first, how much the school has changed and how many different things are going on in the building, and the fact that there's just one person overseeing everything that's going on in that building is, in my opinion, a testament to the person who's running that building. I think this is a critical position that we need to add. Of all the positions that we're contemplating adding, personally, I think this would be pretty high up on the list, if it wasn't top on the list, for me personally. Just because I think it has the greatest impact on some of our more vulnerable students, that is just gonna continue to help us stay in compliance and keep us from, losing track of people that we need to be keeping extra track of. And I certainly hope we can keep this till the end, so.
Thank you. Mr. Tyler, then Mr. Shinn. Unless
I hope, when I first looked at the proposal, I'm like, no, can't support it any way, shape, or form. And then it's one of those things where you had to think about it a little bit more. And Peter Thatcher is a very dynamic school. And I think one thought that always stuck with me is when we actually were going around with Superintendent Sheehan when he was a candidate for the job. And Mr. Larson was there, Mr. Murphy with us, and he basically asked the principal of the school, well, we got a new evaluation system, so how are you making out with it? I'm doing good. Well, no, really, how are you doing that though? No, I'm asking how you do it. And it was more, well, I'm working long nights and I'm working Saturdays and it's just, as the truth started coming out of the story,
she was doing a good job. She's working 24 hours a day.
really, and the superintendent started elaborate more on that, and I think it was a very eye-opening experience, especially for me as a school committee member to sit there and actually hear this story that was going about, and the dynamics of that school are so different than the other elementary schools. Even though I hate to support any increase at all, if there's going to be any support that's needed with assistant principal, or as Jim said, maybe a different title, if you will, that would be the only one that I could support at this time.
Sure. I would just say, Mr. Stores, I wouldn't be opposed to revisiting that issue at some point. Like I said, I'm not optimistic. I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic it's going to get there anyway. But when it does, I think it's an issue that it's certainly valid. It warrants consideration. Mrs. Sawyer had a comment in that.
Yes, would it be possible to have a full-time assistant principal that just floats amongst the schools to at least provide some support to the principals?
I mean, I'll let the administrator speak to that. Ideas come up before, and I think it's
with the
worth
dynamics
consideration.
that take place at Thatcher and the complexity of different grade levels and early childhood education and everything that goes on way before even school starts and when after school even goes, that person would not have the time necessary to do justice to another place. I'll tell you what is useful though. The first piece is that for the first time, this school committee gets to see and home grow a principal being mentored appropriately and have a feeder system for your next elementary principalship, knowing the culture to begin with. This person may have the opportunity, when there is no substitute available or whatever, to go and substitute at another building, Diane, if there was an illness or a long-term, a person that we couldn't get somebody in, you've got that out now. So I think, I wouldn't look at sharing the person. I think they have to owe homage to the one place and do that right. For our model.
Sure.
for
May
what an
I
assistant
ask though,
does.
is that true for all buildings or specifically to
No.
Thatcher?
Just
So again, we're trying to make progress toward 5. Thatcher seems to be the priority now, but could Mrs. Sawyer's point potentially be applicable in
Well-
our next go-round and perhaps shared between, or 2 of the 4? I don't know about all the 4.
As you've heard me say, and I think Mr. Lawson, and thank you for that, and Mike Tyler, my vision was to reorganize, and it still is, the entire transportation office in this district, and that an administrator oversee transportation, not Tom, an administrator, which was going to be the assistant principal, being at Thatcher as the assistant principal, and also being in charge of transportation as an administrator. So to answer your question, we have to look at that when we get on to the process a little bit more, but at the same time, that may be the case at a smaller elementary school like Willett.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just an important point that I think this is not the last time we're going to talk about assistant principals, so I think it's one that we should keep in mind. Mrs. Zito, who knows a little bit about Thatcher.
Yeah, she's a pretty dynamic
Mhm.
individual.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right in my front yard.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you've spent a considerable amount of time volunteering and contributing to that school community, which I know is something that's always referenced within the first 30 seconds that I walk in. Okay, so I think, is there, I'm just going to make a motion to reduce the elementary assistant principal request to $95,000 to be used potentially at Thatcher Elementary School for the position of assistant principal.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I think we only have two more. And frankly, I think it's a pretty easy one.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
When we get on this slide, and this is my personal opinion, it doesn't belong here.
Mhm.
This belongs on the capital improvement list. It does not belong in the budget as much as I would like to have the money to support it
Mhm.
and implement it tomorrow. I just do not believe it belongs in this
And-
FY15 budget.
And in the interest of saving time, just a yes or no question, is this in our capital improvements budget?
Absolutely.
A motion to remove the wireless infrastructure line item from the proposed net school spending budget.
Second.
Discussion.
Mr. Source.
I want to say, from what I've heard from city councilors, it's so far down on the list that it's likely not to happen anytime soon. Now, that's at least what's been relayed to me. I don't know how accurate that is. I know that there's some things on the capital improvements that are probably a higher priority. So I think, obviously, in this budget, maybe this is not possible. I know that there's supposedly funding going through the State House that might help us here. That's great. But this is a major concern, especially if Park actually does ever make its way here, which is supposed to be 2 years from now. So if this is so far down on the capital improvements, then are we gonna have it in 2 years?
I just want to be clear, I think this is important for the community. The capital improvements, every item on the capital improvements list has a designation.
Sure.
And this is designated priority one.
And how many other priority ones do we have?
There is a level ahead of priority one. It's listed as urgent, but the definition that is necessary to get to urgent is a very narrow one. And at the moment, it doesn't fit in. But the superintendent has made very clear, and this committee has and will continue to make very clear, this is not an option. You can't run a 21st century school system without wireless. We've done it for too long, but it will take some time. And it is, I would say, of the topics that take place between the school administration and the municipal government, if we were to sort of look at a pie graph in the amount of time, especially if we take out transportation, there's a significant amount of time being spent talking about this, and I don't think it's accurate to say that it's not a priority. Will it take time? Yes, but eventually it's necessary. Mr. Withers?
Yeah, a lot of, again, what you said, I was gonna say, I mean, from what in my conversation with people in the municipal government, this is something that is a priority, and it's a priority in the community. We've talked about it. We're making it an important priority. Superintendent Sheehan has talked about it. The mayor, it's on the mayor's agenda. City council men and women I've talked to, this is not something that, they see happening, many years down the road. This is something that is, if not this year, it's imminent in the coming future. And but at the same time, this isn't an item that we put in a yearly budget to spend $750,000 to do it. This is something that goes through the capital improvements process, and our job is to continue to push to get it pushed higher up the priority list, which we're doing as we speak.
Yeah, and we will continue to aggressively. Mr. Tyler?
Yeah, and if I can add to that, absolutely, Steve, I agree with you 100%, and I think there's just one more thought to that. I mean, if anybody doesn't think that, I think that technology is the key for Attleboro to get to the next stage. Well, they haven't been listening to me for a long time. I truly believe that is the way we're going to go. But I think it's more important to say that we've been spending a lot of our net school spending dollars and revolving funds on things that we shouldn't be doing. And this is one of them. This is not our obligation to do this. This is a capital improvement 100%. We should not be taking a dime on that school spending or on our revolving accounts that are only there to make sure that we have a little backup plan if something, if a facility goes down or a stove in the culinary arts. That's what it's for. We're not supposed to be building for the future. The city does have an obligation, and we have to just stop taking money out of our net school spending to meet those future obligations. That's it.
Mr. Sheehan?
Just one last piece. It is in the CIP. It's $750,000. At the same time, it is a priority one, which they won't touch. They only looked at the urgency pieces as Bill and Fran saw tonight. At the same time, this moves to the urgent piece as of end of next year, because POC is in 2016, and the definition is a project will also be considered urgent if it is required for immediate compliance with city, state, and/or federal regulations. Period. So, no matter what, this becomes a reality, even if we procrastinate one.
But just to be clear, it's certainly, I think the committee's position and your position that we should not wait until we get to that point, because.
No, but we may not have the luxury.
Yep.
But it's not as if we're giving up on anything either. We're gonna continue to do our work in this district. But Mr. Tyler's right. This should not be net school spending dollars.
Yep. Mr. Storrs?
You know, what Mr. Sheehan said is exactly what I tried to relay at the beginning, is only the urgent items is what's,
Yes.
that's being addressed.
That's
But the
right.
fact that you're telling me it's gonna be bumped up to urgent makes me feel a little bit better about being able to remove this.
Yeah, I think the only thing is that, I think that's in the normal process, and in the yearly review, the urgent items are the only ones. That's sort of how the definition is built, but that doesn't mean throughout the course of the year, no issues will potentially be addressed. And I think it's incumbent upon this committee and the administration to advocate vigorously to identify why the advantages that students will enjoy if this is put into place sooner rather than later. So, but the real point is, and this is why I thought this is one that we could expedite. This is still literally in our plan. It's just in our other plan. So, is the motion, does anyone remember if the motion was made?
I'll make a motion to strike this from the preliminary.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, the school security plan, which each time we have addressed this, I have felt the need to just add the sort of qualifier that we do not have an ongoing security breach. Okay, our schools are safe. The administration has identified a organization that could confer with the district and help to develop comprehensive plans that we believe would be good from a school environment. And Mr. Sheehan did talk about this in their earlier presentation. I don't want to go into the specifics, but I would just say that various stakeholders have identified school safety as an issue that is extremely important to them, and I would just make a motion to retain the school security plan in the preliminary request.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? End of slide, click to exit.
Mr. Chairman, can we talk about what the potential change of the budget is?
1.957.
Number with all the decisions that
Yep.
we've made tonight?
It's 1.9575.
Hey,
Almost
so,
$2 million.
it's in the ballpark of 1.9 million, but that is before we correct the double counting of the steps and lanes issue. So the reductions that we have voted on are in the vicinity of 1.9 million, I'm told.
Almost 2.
But I expect that number will go up once we address that other issue. I intend to make a statement that I'll circulate to the committee related to this. Again, I think Mr. Tyler and I had a private conversation a few days ago, and we asked, we were sort of thinking about the sequence, and one of the reasons that, as it turned out, we had to have a meeting tonight anyway, but one of the reasons that we felt it was important for this to take place now is that we do have our public hearing coming up on Monday, May 5th, and we want to, while, again, you will see every single thing that we just eliminated, you will see again, and the community will hear about again, because they are priorities and they are important. But we have a responsibility to put forth a responsible and realistic budget, and we think that's what we need to make sure that we convey to the community. And let's also be clear, this budget is still over level services, and we still have a deficit. I think this committee has done some good work tonight. We're not anywhere close to being out of the woods. We have a lot of work ahead of us. We have important decisions that need to be made. And I just want to express my appreciation, particularly when there were issues that came up tonight that not everyone saw eye to eye on, that we were able to sort of do it with a collaborative spirit and a constructive approach. So we will reconvene on Monday, May 5th. We will have our public hearing. We will see a new presentation reflective of the committee's votes tonight on the budget, the eliminations, the reductions made.
So,
And
can I get that clear?
I-
So, the presentation for the public on the Monday
prior to the public hearing.
is going to be reflective of the decisions that were made tonight?
That is correct.
Okay,
That is correct, in its current form.
right.
And then I would be remiss if I did not mention that the following night, for those who like public hearings, there is another public hearing that will be Tuesday, May 6th at City Hall. There will be measures that the City Council will be taking public comments on that are of vital importance to the Attleboro School District and to the 6,000 students who will be going to school there in just a few hours. So I want to, again, thank you all for your patience. I want to thank the administration for the hard work in putting together the budget, for the understanding that's been exhibited with regard to the committee's decisions. In this process, we'll move forward, I'm sure, with the collaborative spirit that was exhibited tonight. So, motion to adjourn. All in favor?